An 89-year-old woman was robbed, but when Barron Trump stepped in, his response shocked everyone. Like and subscribe to see the bold move that left the world stunned. The quiet suburban street was bathed in the soft glow of the evening sun, the kind of neighborhood where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. But tonight, that calm was shattered. Near the corner of a small park, an 89-year-old woman, frail and trembling, clutched her purse tightly as two men in hooded jackets surrounded her. Their voices were sharp and demanding, barking orders for her to hand over her belongings. "I don't have much," the elderly woman stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She clung to her purse like it was her last connection to dignity. The taller of the two thieves sneered and yanked it from her grip, sending her stumbling backward. She hit the ground hard, a faint cry escaping her lips. Passers-by froze, watching the scene unfold from a distance. Some pulled out their phones to record, others murmured nervously, but no one dared to step in. The thieves didn't care about the growing audience. They were too busy rummaging through the woman's belongings, laughing as they tossed aside her medication and personal items in search of cash. Then from across the street, the sound of tires screeching broke through the chaos. A sleek black SUV came to an abrupt halt, the door flying open. Out stepped Barron Trump, tall and composed, his face set with a look of calm determination. He had been driving by when he spotted the commotion and didn't think twice before stopping. The crowd, already filming the incident, now turned their cameras toward Barron. Whispers spread like wildfire as people recognized the youngest son of the former president. But Barron didn't seem to notice or care. His eyes were locked on the two men, who now stood frozen, their loot in hand, staring at him with a mix of confusion and defiance. Barron took a step forward, his voice steady but sharp. "Put it down," he said simply, his gaze unflinching. The taller thief sneered, clearly unimpressed. "And who do you think you are?" he spat, stepping toward Barron. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Barron didn't flinch, his voice growing colder. "You heard me. Put it down. Now." The tension was electric, and the crowd leaned forward, their phones capturing every second. No one could have predicted what would happen next. The taller thief lunged at Barron, his fist swinging with all the force of someone used to intimidation. The crowd gasped collectively, some even yelling out warnings. But Barron didn't flinch. In one swift, calculated move, he sidestepped the punch, grabbing the man's arm mid-swing. The movement was quick, precise, and left the thief momentarily stunned. Barron twisted the man's arm just enough to make him stagger back, his confidence now visibly shaken. "I warned you," Barron said evenly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The smaller thief, frozen in place, dropped the bag he was holding and stumbled backward. "Man, let's just go," he hissed, his voice trembling. He clearly wasn't prepared for any kind of confrontation, let alone one with someone who clearly knew how to handle himself. The taller thief recovered quickly, his pride taking over where reason should have been. He charged again, this time with both hands aiming to grab Barron. But Barron was faster. With a quick step to the side, he tripped the man, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. The crowd erupted into cheers, some even clapping as Barron stood over the thief, calm and composed, like a lion towering over its prey. The elderly woman, still sitting on the ground, began to cry softly, not out of fear, but out of relief. Barron knelt down beside her, his tone shifting to one of concern. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked gently, his hand lightly touching her arm. She nodded shakily, her voice barely audible. I think I'm okay," she said. "But they took my purse." Barron turned his head sharply toward the smaller thief, who was still standing frozen a few feet away. His eyes locked on the man, and in a voice as cold as steel, he said, "Pick it up. Hand it back. Now." The smaller thief didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to pick up the purse, his hands trembling as he handed it to Barron. I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. Barron ignored the apology and turned back to the elderly woman, handing her the purse with a warm, reassuring smile. "Here you go," he said softly. "Everything's in there. Check, just to be sure." The woman took the purse with trembling hands, nodding through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. You You didn't have to do this. Barron smiled faintly, his eyes kind. Yes, I did, he replied simply. Everyone deserves to feel safe. The taller thief, now sitting on the ground with a bruised ego, glared up at Barron. You think you've won? He spat, trying to salvage some shred of his pride. You've got no idea who you're messing with. Barron turned to him, his calm demeanor unshaken. Neither do you, he replied, but you're about to find out. At that moment, the sound of police sirens echoed in the distance. The crowd parted as a patrol car pulled up, 2 officers stepping out with purpose. The thieves froze, their bravado evaporating as the officers approached. Barron stood up straight, gesturing toward the 2 men. They assaulted this woman and tried to rob her, he said plainly, his voice clear and steady. The crowd can back me up. The officers nodded, taking control of the situation as they handcuffed the thieves and began questioning witnesses. The taller thief's defiance had completely vanished, and the smaller one looked like he wanted to disappear altogether. The crowd began clapping as the 2 men were led to the patrol car, their once confident swagger replaced with the shame of being caught. As the officers drove away, Barron turned back to the elderly woman, who was now being helped to her feet by a kind passerby. Can I call someone for you? Barron asked. Family? A friend? She shook her head, still overwhelmed. No, I'll be fine, she said softly. You've already done so much. Barron nodded, his expression thoughtful. Just take care of yourself, he said. You're stronger than you think. As the crowd began to disperse, a few people approached Barron, thanking him for stepping in. One man holding his phone said, You know this is all over the internet already, right? The world's gonna know what you did today. Barron shrugged, a faint smile playing on his lips. It's not about the world knowing, he said. It's about doing the right thing when it counts. The cameras continued to follow him as he walked back to his SUV, calm and composed as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But for everyone who had witnessed it, the moment was unforgettable, a powerful reminder that courage and kindness can stand up to even the worst of humanity. As the police car disappeared down the street with the 2 thieves in custody, the atmosphere around the park began to shift. The crowd that had gathered was still abuzz, murmuring about what they had just witnessed. Many had their phones out, uploading videos of the incident, the headlines already forming in their minds. Barron Trump stops robbery and bold act of courage. Barron, however, seemed unfazed by the attention. He walked back toward the elderly woman, who was now seated on a park bench with a blanket draped over her shoulders, provided by a kind passerby. Her hands still trembled as she clutched her recovered purse, but her eyes were filled with gratitude. You're really Barron Trump, aren't you? She asked softly, her voice laced with both awe and disbelief. Barron smiled faintly, sitting down beside her. That's what they tell me, he said with a slight chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. The woman shook her head, her voice breaking slightly. I never thought someone like you would step in for someone like me. People just walk by these days. They don't care. Barron's expression grew serious, his gaze meeting hers. That's not how it should be, he said firmly. We're all in this world together. If we don't look out for each other, what's the point? The woman nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for helping me. Before Barron could respond, a young man from the crowd stepped forward hesitantly, holding his phone. Mr. Trump? He said nervously. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did. That was incredible. Barron turned to him, giving a polite nod. Just doing what anyone should, he said simply. The man shook his head. No, you don't get it, he said, his voice growing more animated. Most people would have walked away. They would have been too scared or just ignored it. But you stepped in, and now everyone's talking about it. He held up his phone, showing Barron the social media posts that had already started to go viral. The videos of him confronting the thieves were everywhere, with captions like, Barron Trump saves the day, and Trump's son stands up for justice. Barron sighed softly, leaning back on the bench. That's not why I did it, he said. It's not about going viral. It's about doing what's right, no matter who's watching. The young man nodded, clearly moved. Yeah, but people need to see this, he said earnestly. The world needs more of this. Maybe it'll inspire someone else to step up next time. As more people approached Barron to thank him, he noticed a boy, no older than 12, standing off to the side with wide, admiring eyes. Barron waved him over, and the boy hesitated before shuffling closer. "What's your name, kid?" Barron asked, his tone warm. "Danny," the boy said shyly, clutching a small backpack. "Well, Danny," Barron said, leaning forward slightly, "what would you do if you saw something like this happen?" The boy looked down, thinking for a moment. I'd want to help, but I don't think I'd be brave enough." Barron smiled, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Bravery isn't about not being scared," he said. "It's about doing what's right, even when you are. And trust me, you've got that in you." Danny's eyes lit up, and he nodded firmly. "Thanks, Mr. Trump," he said, his voice filled with newfound confidence. As the boy walked back to his parents, Barron glanced around at the remaining crowd. "All right, folks," he said, standing up. "Show's over. Let's all get back to our day, yeah?" The crowd began to disperse, but the murmurs of admiration and the sound of people sharing the story didn't fade. Barron turned back to the elderly woman, helping her to her feet. "Can I give you a ride home?" he asked. "Oh, no, I couldn't trouble you," she said, shaking her head. "It's no trouble," Barron insisted. "I want to make sure you're safe." With a bit of coaxing, the woman agreed, and Barron escorted her to his SUV, helping her into the passenger seat. As they drove through the quiet streets, she glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said softly, "your family's always in the spotlight. People say all kinds of things about you, good and bad. But what you did today, that shows who you really are." Barron glanced at her, his face unreadable for a moment before he smiled. "People can say what they want," he said. "At the end of the day, it's our actions that define us." The woman nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Well, today your actions spoke loud and clear." The SUV pulled up to the woman's modest home, a small but tidy house on a quiet street. Barron stepped out first, walking around to open the door for her. She smiled warmly, clutching her purse tightly as she stepped onto the sidewalk. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've done more for me today than I can ever repay." "You don't owe me anything," Barron said gently, his tone sincere. "Just take care of yourself, all right? And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." He handed her a business card with a simple phone number on it. No name, no title, just a direct line. As she walked toward her front door, she paused, turning back to look at him. "You're not just your father's son," she said softly. "You're something else entirely." Barron gave her a small smile, tipping his head before getting back into the SUV. As he drove off, his mind raced, replaying the day's events. He wasn't one to seek attention, and yet the viral videos and the crowd's reactions had left an impression on him. For someone who had grown up under the constant glare of the spotlight, today felt different. Real. Back at home, Barron's phone buzzed incessantly. Texts, calls, and social media notifications flooded in as the world reacted to his actions. News outlets had already picked up the story, with headlines like, "Barron Trump confronts thieves in heroic act of bravery. Trump's youngest son becomes an unexpected hero." Barron sighed, setting his phone aside. He wasn't in this for fame or recognition, but he knew the narrative was out of his control now. Just as he leaned back in his chair, another notification popped up on his screen, a text from an unknown number. "You've made waves today. Don't stop now. The world needs more like you." Barron stared at the message, his curiosity piqued. Who had sent it? He thought about responding but decided against it. Instead, he scrolled through his social media feed, seeing the flood of reactions. Among the praise and admiration, there were also comments filled with skepticism and hate, people accusing him of staging the incident for publicity. He smirked slightly, shaking his head. "Some people just don't get it," he muttered to himself. But it wasn't the negativity that stuck with him. It was the overwhelming number of people who said his actions had inspired them. Messages from strangers poured in, sharing their own stories of moments where they wish they'd had the courage to step in, or thanking him for reminding them that kindness and bravery still mattered. Later that evening, Barron sat down with his mother, Melania, who had heard about the incident from the news. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression both proud and concerned. "You did a good thing today," she said, her voice soft. But this kind of attention, it can be overwhelming. Barron nodded. I know, he replied, but it wasn't about the attention. It was about doing what was right. Melania smiled faintly, her eyes filled with motherly pride. That's what makes it even more meaningful, she said. Just remember, your actions speak louder than any words or headlines. As the night wore on, Barron found himself unable to sleep. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about the elderly woman, the boy he'd spoken to, and the countless strangers who had reached out. The day had been more than just a confrontation. It had been a reminder of the power of small actions. The next morning, a knock on the door jolted him out of his thoughts. Opening it, he found a courier holding a package addressed to him. Inside was a handwritten note. Heroes don't always wear capes, and they don't always make the news. But sometimes they remind us all of what's possible. Thank you for stepping up when others didn't. There was no signature, but Barron didn't need one. The note said it all. As he set the note aside, Barron made a quiet decision. Today had been a turning point, not just for the people he helped, but for him as well. He realized he had a platform, not just because of his name, but because of his actions. And if his actions could inspire others to do the right thing, then maybe, just maybe, he was on the right path. As the sun rose over the city, Barron looked out the window, his reflection staring back at him. The world had seen a glimpse of who he really was, and for the first time, he was ready to embrace it. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful moments that remind us of the strength in doing what's right. Stay tuned. This is just the beginning.